You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into our Locked On Hawks Postcast. I am your host, Tanitra Batiste. Alongside me is Deshaun Tate. This is your home for the best Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And the Locked On Hawks Postcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tate, both the Hawks and Magic came into tonight's matchup minus an all-star. We'll talk about how the Hawks survived without theirs in the and one. Then we'll talk more about what the prospects are for a hobbled Hawks squad down the stretch. But first, we got T's and takes on the Hawks 109-92 win over the Magic. And Deshaun, you said that you loved the Hawks' second half mindset.
I did, because listen, I mean, they come into this game and they're struggling on offense as one of the best scoring teams in the league, right? Orlando being a team that we know just doesn't particularly score very well. I think they're one of the worst 5 in the league in terms of scoring. And with this Hawks team coming out looking sluggish, we've seen this before, especially earlier in the season. They seem to be up and down like a roller coaster ride. For those who love amusement parks, that was the Atlanta Hawks on tonight on the roller coaster. But they look like a different team in the third quarter, and this isn't necessarily an Atlanta Hawks team that historically has been known for performing well in the third quarter. Yeah. Some way, somehow, they find a way to string it along. Obviously, that helped them out a ton. But you got to have that mentality of it's a whole new game because it's a whole new half and you're coming in the locker room re-energized and everything else. Obviously, you don't have Trae and all the stuff that comes along with that. But it was yet another physical battle, much like what we saw in the last game. But I think that between these two games back to back, from a physicality standpoint, that boded well for the Atlanta Hawks, because this is kind of teaching them, on at least if not nothing else, what kind of mindset in terms of the toughness that they're going to have, because we all know, at least I personally feel, I'll speak for myself, not necessarily one of the tougher teams in the NBA.
Yeah. And I think I would say maybe loving the second half mindset. I'd say loving the third quarter mindset.
There you go.
Yeah, I might have to say that, because in the third quarter, the Hawks came out smoking, 38 points in that quarter to have that total for the Magic. Now, granted, the Hawks were really, really good in a couple different areas that we kind of look and kind of put a spotlight on pretty much every game, right? So we always kind of look to see how they're shooting from the field, nearly 46% tonight. That 3-point line was magnificent for them, 42% for the Hawks, because remember, they've been really, really struggling from deep of late. And then they got back to one of the cornerstones of their identity, 88% from the free throw line. But speaking of that free throw line, part of the reason that this game got out of hand is because at one point the Magic actually were 7 of 17 from the free throw line and ended up just 8 of 18. So a lot of that mindset that the Hawks went into the second half with also has to do with the lack of a focused mindset of the Magic, particularly at the charity stripe, when you've got some easy opportunities there to maybe help you get back into the game. But then the Hawks kind of let him back in the game in the fourth quarter, because the Magic scored 22, but the Hawks only scored 26. So for me, I don't quite understand how you can be that effective in the third quarter and then just kind of drop off and decide, hey, we're just not going to have an offensive game plan. We're just going to kind of muddle it around here and kind of just basically sauce the clock. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you can't, or salt the clock rather, you can't salt the clock because it's the NBA. So at any time in the association in a game, a team can get hot, a person can get hot, and we know how the Hawks struggle against random role players coming out of nowhere and just starting to hit threes on site. So that piece for me was not a place where I was comfortable, because again, And we'll talk about this now, and we're going to talk about it again in the deep dive because it's really that serious. When you're missing your sharpest of sharpshooters in Trae Young, you can't afford to give away anything to that other team. You can't afford to concede anything, because if the Magic had gone on a run and if they'd gotten themselves together with their deep ball, where were the Hawks going to go in crunch time for someone who was reliable, who would be able to hit the three? And yes, the answer could essentially be a Bogdan Bogdanovic. He definitely is a guy who can hit some clutch three-pointers, right? And Bogey had 17 points on 3 of 5 shooting from 3. But my point being, you got Bogey in the starting lineup. So then that technically goes back to you have one less sharpshooter from beyond the arc. That's why I didn't really, I can give you the third quarter mindset. That fourth quarter mindset, ooh, well, that's a little bit of a different, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, a little bit of a different story for sure. I will say this much though, in regards to, I don't think it's overly optimistic or overly positive, but I will say that this is typically a game that I feel like I could see Atlanta, instead of playing to win, I could see them playing not to lose. And I still felt like they were playing to win. I want to give them a little bit of credit, because this is also another one of those games, especially against a team that has been pretty good this season. I mean, yes, without their number one option, obviously the Hawks without their number one option, both of them have their number 2 options actively playing in the game. But this could be one that I could see Orlando coming back and winning. This was a team like the Atlanta Hawks that, went out there and found a way to get the job done. I know it sounds kind of sad to say that, hey, I'm proud of them for finishing the game the way that they were doing what you're supposed to do. I know people that are like, hey, man, ain't nobody going to tell me what to do. I take care of my kids. Well, yeah, you're supposed to. You're their dad or you're their mom. You're supposed to do that. These are the things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep your foot on the gas. You're supposed to keep your foot on their necks. That's not something I feel the most comfortable saying, that if they were in this position, and you just gave me a hypothetical before this game started and told me that this was going to happen, that I would have felt comfortable saying that the Atlanta Hawks were going to win, because I don't necessarily feel that way. And this is where the team was, if not nothing else, did exactly what I guess Coach Quinn Snyder said that they had to do in order to get wins, and that's to be average.
Yeah, and they were just enough average / above average at critical moments where you needed each player to be, and really you had a pretty concerted effort. I can't say that everyone stepped up, but I can say that there were a number of players who stepped up and really, at least for a moment, allowed you not to feel the absence of Trae Young so much. Now, when I say that, please understand, I am not one of those people who's saying, oh yeah, look at what the Hawks do without Trae Young. Look what the Hawks did without Trae Young. This is one win. The Hawks are 3-9 in opportunities like this where Trae Young's not in the lineup or Trae Young's hobbled and has to exit the game. Okay. So that's not what we're saying. But if you know that you're going to be without your star player for the stretch, and you at least can see a path to the Hawks winning games, then you've got to give credit where credit is due for them taking advantage of the opportunity to win the game, knowing that, hey, we want to make sure here's a chance for us to win the series. They had a chance to win the series against the Raptors Friday night and couldn't get it done. That would have been critical because the Raptors were a couple games behind them, Magic a couple games ahead of them. So this was a critical game that they had to win for more than just, hey, let's get off the schneid of a 3-game skid. This was also very, very important to the standings of those teams that kind of are sitting right outside of that 1 through 6 and find themselves in the play-in round. And now you're kind of positioning for what the play-in round is going to look like, at least as it relates to the Hawks. Now, like we alluded to, Trae Young was not in the game. He's out with a left hand injury for at least the next 4 weeks. That is monumental. That's going to have some serious implications. And Deshaun and I are going to talk about it with you and talk more Hawks Magic on the other side in the And One. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is key. All those emails, reports, presentations are equally important to the collaboration needed to get things done. And that's where Grammarly can help. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work. Now, think about it. Deshaun and I, that's the kind of thing we do pre-production. We look for how we're going to tease a topic. We look for the bullet points on a topic, and we want to make sure that we have the right information in place. Think about this. How much easier would an AI writing partner maybe make that for us for those little spaces and places where it counts to make this a tight postcast? Now, 96% of Grammarly users report that Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing. It works across 500,000 apps and websites. By understanding your writing in context, Grammarly also provides relevant, personalized suggestions. So make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. I'll spell that for you. It's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said and easier done with Grammarly. So, Deshaun, we got the news today that during Friday's game versus the Raptors, Trae Young suffered a left hand injury, underwent an MRI Saturday, and it revealed a tear of the RCL on that left pinky finger. And we kind of noticed something wasn't quite right Friday, but then we got the confirmation today that he'll undergo surgery Tuesday and he'll be reevaluated in 4 weeks. And yes, we know that he's been ballyhooed for a couple things this season, averaging 27 points. Averaging 11 assists, and also putting forth more effort, even if it doesn't always show up in the stat line, but putting more effort into his defensive side of the game and still showing you that he is that guy, that he is that all-star. When you lose a guy like that, yes, you lose the 27 points of productivity. We saw some of that rear its head early on. Yes, you miss the guy who can distribute the ball and make sure that everybody gets a touch when that person or that player has the hot hand, and somebody who's starting to understand the importance of defense, understanding the importance of being a pickpocket and how much that gives an advantage to the Hawks because they're going to have more possessions, or how important it is for him to stand there and take that charge. So there are a lot of things that he brings to the table for this team. But what are your biggest concerns about Trae not being available for at least 15 games down this final stretch of about 26 games left in the season? Hey, D, can't hear you.
Better? Okay, perfect. I think that it is more so one of those things that the Hawks kind of do have an answer for. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, and I'll explain. I think that they have a piece that you can insert, a piece that you can plug and play that not a lot of teams have. And I think this is where we do have to appreciate having Dejounte Murray on this team, because you have someone that their natural style is a point guard, whether that's a combo guard or whatever, what have you, but someone who can, it doesn't have to necessarily be by committee of the team. Yeah. A number one option, a guy who knows how to lead a team. Remember, it wasn't that long ago we played this same Orlando Magic team and Trae Young was not in the lineup. We came away with a win. We turned around in the very next game and played another team in Florida, the Miami Heat, and with no Trae Young. And and so there is a good vibe around this team's performances, even when Trae is not playing. Sometimes you're going to take a hit when you're having someone like a Trae not playing in the game. And that could be the biggest concern, right? But you have an extension of the coach on the floor. If you watch tonight's game, I think they were coming off of, going into a timeout or whatever the case may be. I think the Hawks may have went on a run or whatever. And he had a face-to-face conversation with Dejounte Murray, talking about Quinn Snyder. And Quinn Snyder, kind of gave him a pat on the butt and told him good job. I think we also seen him running the break on back-to-back possessions where one of them finished with a Jalen Johnson dunk and the other one finished in a Jalen Johnson layup. And then that also forced another Magic timeout. So the concerning part, I think that there is an answer for that. I'm not saying that this is a replacement by any means. You're going to get the exact same thing, but I think that this is about as close as it could possibly get without having to dive too deep into an already depleted or inexperienced Kobe Buffkin type of guy to have to come in and fill that role.
Or ask too much of Bogdan Bogdanovic as well, because there are going to always be moments where Bogey's going to give you what you need, the 17 points tonight, and we know that he can do even more. But essentially, Bogey's a sixth man. He's the best sixth man in the league, you can argue, but he's a sixth man nonetheless. And typically that sixth man can carry you through maybe 3 to 5 games. But when you start talking about 15, 17, 20 games, that's kind of another thought. And I think for me, my biggest concern is probably whether or not Dejounte is going to be consistently inconsistent with it. If we can get him to consistently hover at a double-double, or even tonight, 1 rebound shy of a triple-double, and you can get that just about every game. And we're not talking about what I like to call kind of a high-end triple-double, right? It doesn't always have to be a triple-double of 25 points and I think he had 9 rebounds and 11 assists. It doesn't have to be that kind of triple-double every single night. In fact, it can be a double-double most nights, but that's probably my biggest concern. Are we at a point in place in this season where Dejounte Murray we know he's willing and we know he's able, but is he really ready to be that guy each and every night? And I think he can be. The question becomes, will he be? That's probably my biggest concern. And of course, the reality is a concern about further injury, because the pain point when we got the news that Onyeka Okongwu would be out for the foreseeable future, it was palpable. I mean, it actually might have been a little bit more painful in the moment than even hearing about Trae Young. I think Trae Young finding out about that was a shocker, more so than a pain point. Because with Onyeka Okongwu, you literally are looking around oh, dear God, what's going to happen? Because we all knew Clint was going back in, not quite himself, maybe 70% of himself on a good night. Whereas with Trae Young, at least to your point, you've got 100% healthy DJ, you've got a healthy Bogey, you've got a healthy Kobe. So that's probably my biggest concern, not so much Trae's departure, but dear God, is anybody else going to fall?
I want to mention something else. I'm glad that you mentioned a couple guys within the front court, because when you've got Clint playing and don't have Onyeka, or you got Onyeka and don't have Clint, the one guy who has just been available and ready, and again probably because he doesn't play as much as the other guys, has been Bruno Fernando. This energy that he's been bringing, even if it is for a very small sample, it is very, very small sample. But you start to look in his numbers and coming into, this game, 7 points, 5 rebounds in 15 minutes when he doesn't have either Onyeka and or Clint. And he pretty much matched that on tonight, 7 points, 4 assists, but it felt like his production feels like it's much bigger than that. He's dunking the ball over, 4 defenders and things like that. I'm not making it sound like he's Shaquille O'Neal, but it kind of felt like that sometimes with what he's able to get in there and do, and he's being fearless. He's not overthinking. He's just letting the game come to him, and I think that is really, really big, considering the fact that, for example, on a night like tonight where, sure, the Hawks got out-rebounded, but only by 6. And you got to remember, they don't have their 2 primary bigs, the starter or the backup. And then in the paint points, they had more paint points than Orlando on tonight. They had 50 versus Orlando's 47. I can't tell you that I necessarily thought that was going to happen, especially when you take away how occasionally Jalen Johnson likes to shoot a couple threes on the outside.
Yeah. And I think those are probably the spaces and places where if you can get something maybe a level up from each player, Bruno Fernando being actually a great example, because when you look at his stat line and see 4 assists and 2 steals, that's actually very encouraging, because that means, number one, you're helping to distribute the ball, and number 2, you're able to see those passing lanes a little bit better as a big. I like it. And if we can get little pieces from each player at just a level above where they're playing, then I think the Hawks can have a better opportunity to get through this tough stretch. And I think another one is giving Quinn Snyder credit for always having the ability to make adjustments. The Hawks had stretch where they only scored like 28 points in 18 minutes. And for a high scoring team in a high scoring league this season, that's not a lot. So Quinn Snyder then goes to the small ball lineup, DJ, Bogey, Dre, Sadiq, and Jalen, and it works. They go on a run and never really look back. How do you feel like that decision helped to get that offense jump started?
I think it's just more of a matter of just really playing with a little bit of urgency. Obviously, when you're playing in a small ball type of situation, you know that you always preaching pace. You got to go out there and be able to play with some pace and then kind of throw Orlando off a little bit. Orlando not necessarily playing a ton of big guys, but in the situation where you do have someone like a Jonathan Isaac, who just seems like he's never 100%, got hurt again tonight. Hope he's okay. But then even Batazde, who's not the best lateral moving big that you could put out there. And Orlando needed to play some sort of a small ball as well. And the Atlanta Hawks had to match that. They had no choice because they didn't have, the horses in the front court to put out there. But when you have somebody like a Jalen Johnson who can stretch, the bigs for Orlando out to the perimeter and things like that, it only makes sense to do those types of things. That's why he's here. That's why he gets paid the big money. And I think that's another reason behind why it was successful, because we saw Atlanta be able to get up and down the floor a little bit, force Orlando into, making them huff and puff a little bit, getting up and down, being overly physical, picking up fouls. Even in the instances where you fouled Orlando, they were unable to throw a rock in the ocean from the boat. They only shot 44% from the charity stripe. So I think that it was a combination of many things, and credit to head coach Quinn Snyder for pointing that out and seeing that.
And when we come back, we'll talk about the sustainability of what we saw tonight and one or two more players that could help with that when we come back in Who Got Next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is also brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? That's what I get with Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix. With it, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, your budget. They do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. You can easily do that because your stylist helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. Again, just give the stylist your size, your style, your budget preferences as well. You can then order boxes when you want to, how you want to, no subscription required. And they'll send you 5 just for you pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. For me, that is so critical because, first of all, I hate shopping. Let's just start right there. So me going into a brick and mortar is problematic. So the thought of someone actually paying attention to what my style is and trying to lean into that really, really helps. And I'm always on the go working like 17 jobs. So I really don't have that kind of time. This is where something like Stitch Fix fits perfectly. It's style that makes you feel as good as you look. So you can get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's Stitch, STITCHFIX.com/lockedon. Again, it's stitchfix.com/lockedon because, hey, if you don't love something, you can send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free, but you won't need to because Stitch Fix will make it easy for you, and it'll help you with outfits that make you look good and feel good too. So, Deshaun, we talked a little bit about how the Hawks played in the third quarter, where they literally went on an 18-1 run that essentially sealed the game, even though they kind of lulled for the fourth quarter. But it was a massive quarter for DJ, massive quarter for Jalen Johnson, 16 for Dejounte Murray, 10 for Jalen Johnson. Heck, the two of them outscored the Magic by themselves because the Magic only scored, 19 points in or 18 points in that quarter. But I also wanted to point out two things. Number one, wanted to ask you about the sustainability of that, because that's the critical piece there. Now, Jalen Johnson, he's probably been the most consistent Hawk this entire season, except for those 5 weeks that he was out. But is this something that he can sustain? Is this something that we saw in DJ tonight that he can sustain?
I think so. I think that number one for DJ, I think that this is something that is normalizing for him. This is just him. This is actually him in his element. being with or without Trae, especially in a situation without Trae, it's almost like this position that he came over here, excuse me, from the San Antonio Spurs. So I think it is just kind of fit right on in. Next guy up, and we know who the next guy is. His number is 5. And then for somebody like a Jalen Johnson, I'll be honest with you, like he's been too consistent for me to kind of dial it back now and believe that I'm not sure if this is something that can continue. At this point, our expectations is that this continues if it does not climb even higher. Yeah. And then not only that, but I think, again, crediting the head coach Quinn Snyder with sticking with that same rotation of starting Saddiq Bey and bringing DeAndre Hunter off the bench, because that's been another piece. And I'll be the first one to stand up and raise my hand up and say, yep, that was me. I said what I said. I was not a believer in him as a starter and some of the things he's never been challenged before. But since he's gone over to that bench, I think things has looked not just a little bit different, but significantly different. And it started out with him being, a guy that was, having limited minutes, similar to what we see with Clint Capella right now. And then it's just kind of turning into what's appearing to look like a permanent thing. And I think that is a positive thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it is sustainable for 4 weeks. That is a really tough ask, if I'm just being honest.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Another piece that Quinn Snyder made a good call on was Kobe Buffkin, bringing him in at certain moments of this game and seeing that he gave you nice two-way play. Don't let the stat line fool you, because the stat line doesn't really tell the complete story. Yeah, Kobe Buffkin only had 2 points in 11 minutes, a rebound, an assist, and a steal, but he also had a block. That might be the most critical. And Michael says it's Kobe's time to shine. I can't agree with you more. I've been watching him closely in my coverage of the College Park Skyhawks, and over again, Coach Ryan Schmidt has talked about how fundamentally sound Kobe Buffkin has been and how fundamentally sound he's decided that he wants to be and is committed to it. And Willie Carswell Jr. says, without Trae, it's no excuses for this team. Continue to play with passion and effort on both ends. I agree with you. You're absolutely right, because I mean, the Magic didn't have Paolo Banchero, and there are going to be nights where the Hawks play teams that don't have their all-star, and you have to make the decision on, hey, I'm going to be the man that steps up when I'm supposed to step up, and I'm going to do that extra thing. So whatever that extra thing is, whether that's two-way play, whether that's, hey, I'll work on my three-point shot, whether that is I'm just going to be more committed to doing whatever it is that I'm asked of, like DeAndre Hunter coming off the bench. That's what you do. That's what's going to make it a no excuses situation if everybody confirms and everybody commits and agrees that, hey, none of us are going to make any excuses. All of us are going to just exceed expectations. And speaking of that, the Jazz come to town on Tuesday. It is the return of John Collins for the first time. What do you think that's going to be like?
I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be electric. I'm looking forward to seeing what I think is likely going to happen, which is a nice little tribute or something up on the video board. And as you know, me and you have been in this locker room plenty of times, and John is also, a huge fan favorite, and just a lot of fun to be around. And I think that I think it'll be enjoyable for for him and for his former teammates to kind of see one another again and just kind of do some small catching up.
Indeed. And I think it's worked out well, because we know we've been getting a monster season so far from Jalen Johnson, but also John Collins is having a nice season in Utah, 14 points, 8 rebounds he's averaging. So yeah, I think that'll be a nice return. They'll give him a nice tribute. And hopefully, as much as we love John Collins, hopefully they'll still send him home with an L so that the Hawks can end this 3-game homestand on a high note. Thanks so much for stopping by the Locked On Hawks Postcast. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out our Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We will see you Tuesday night.